Tonight on Bridge City News, the Colehurst Fire Department was called out to an early morning blaze that destroyed a home. Some of the Lethbridge Hurricanes hockey players gave back to the community in a very special way today. And Alberta Premier Rachel Notley responded to a huge glut of oil by announcing production cuts of close to 9%. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The Colehurst Fire Department responded to a blaze that started in the garage of an 8th Street house at 5 a.m. this morning. After spreading to the attic of the home, firefighters were able to contain the blaze within a few hours. The two people living inside of the home were able to get out safely.
A neighbor actually saw the fire, gained entry through the back entrance, and actually woke the residents up and actually brought them outside. The community's already talking about, I've seen chatter on social media that they're looking to come together and start supporting the family. Obviously it is tough, especially this time of the year, to go through this just before Christmas and kind of lose a lot of your stuff.
A thorough investigation is being done to determine what caused the fire. The Lethbridge Hurricanes, winners of 3 in a row, gave back to the community in a very special way today. A few of the players volunteered at the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen. The boys stood in line, each taking on different tasks. Some of the players spoke about why it's important to give back.
We love doing it. We love helping people out, and I know everyone here appreciates it. And it's always good to, the people in the community support us. So, we need to support them and help them out as much as we can too.
Yeah, it goes both ways. Like at every game, there's lots of fans cheering hard and they're cheering loud. So it revs us up and it helps us, like in the games and stuff like that. Helps our record. So, and it's kind of just like we feed off that. So if we can give back to the people who are cheering and stuff like that, it's always good.
The Canes' charitable work continues tomorrow when they'll visit the Chinook Regional Hospital giving out teddy bears to sick children. This is the time of year when our roads get to be a little more treacherous. The snow melts during the day and then freezes at night, making for some pretty icy driving conditions. Wayne McLachlan is the chief driving instructor with the AMA, and he stopped by our studio recently. Wayne says it's important to learn how to properly steer when you're sliding on snow or ice.
Well, you want to look and steer in the direction you want the vehicle to go. So if your back end is sliding out to your right, you would steer to the right and that sort of thing. So formula basically is off the gas, stay off the brake, look and steer in the direction you want your vehicle to go.
McLachlan says the best way to avoid collisions during the slippery winter months is to give yourself extra time and to simply slow down. Much of our province received quite a bit of snow and colder temperatures over the weekend. With the mercury dropping comes more stalled vehicles. Today we give you tips of making sure you boost your battery safely.
Hi, I'm Matt from Harold's Auto Service, and I'm just going to show you how to quickly and safely boost a dead battery on your vehicle. So what you're going to want to do is take your battery cables and you're going to want to separate the negative and positive. Hook the positive cables up first to your dead vehicle, and then you would take the other end of the cables here and just get both the positives hooked up to the dead vehicle and the good battery. And then what you're going to want to do is hook up your ground cable to your running battery, and then hook up your ground cable to actually the engine block or an engine ground away from the battery, so there's no sparks that can cause a flame or a fire at the battery. You also want to make sure that your vehicles aren't touching because they can ground out and short out that way. So make sure that the vehicles are not touching when you connect these cables together. And also make sure your battery is not frozen. So take a look at it. If the sides are bulging or any of that kind of stuff, the battery is probably frozen and you shouldn't boost it because it can blow up or start on fire kind of thing and stuff like that. So you want to be very cautious of that. But other than that, it's simply hook up the positive to the dead vehicle or to the running vehicle, hook up the positive to the dead vehicle, hook up your negative to the running vehicle, and then hook up your negative to the ground on the boosting vehicle, and then just turn her over and it should boost right up for you.
It is recommended when it comes to winter driving, most vehicle batteries should have a minimum of 550 cold cranking amps. Officials in Calgary have temporarily closed a hockey arena as a result of engineering reports the city commissioned earlier this year when another rink's roof collapsed. The city says it received a report on Friday about the Jack Set Arena, which advised that a large amount of snow on the roof could create a hazard. The roof at the Fairview Community Centre collapsed last February, a day after the building was evacuated. Fortunately, no one was injured. A fire is under investigation in Wetaskiwin where 2 people died. RCMP say the home was engulfed in flames when firefighters arrived over the weekend. Investigators say an 88-year-old woman and a 62-year-old man died at the scene. They say nobody else was inside of the home when the fire broke out. Alberta Premier Rachel Notley announced that there will be an 8.7% oil production cut, which translates to 325,000 barrels of raw crude and bitumen per day beginning January 1st. Notley says the cuts will remain in place until the 35 million barrels of oil in storage makes it to market, which is likely next spring. She says the cuts are in response to the high oil price differential, which is costing the national economy more than $80 million a day. Notley says the price gap is caused by Ottawa's decades-long inability to build more pipelines. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was in Buenos Aires for the G20 summit over the weekend. Our PM says he learned of Liberal MP Raj Grewal's gambling problem just over a week ago. His office had no information that an RCMP investigation was connected to the issue.
On Wednesday of last week, I was apprised of Mr. Grewal's gambling problem. That was the first time at which I became aware of that, and I understand my office became aware of that within a day or so prior to briefing me. In regards to police investigations, we were aware that the RCMP was asking questions related to the India trip and the ethics investigation that was going on around Mr. Grewal, but we had no information at that point that there was any connection to a gambling problem that we had no information on. And as always, the RCMP conducts its investigations.
A newly published study says a healthy brain can also equal a healthy body.
It's almost certainly true that by improving our body's health, we can improve our brain health, but also it seems like by improving our brain health, we can probably improve our physical health, our body's health.
Watch my full interview with Dr. Henry Monka after Business News, discussing exercises used to improve brain function and how it impacts the body. There's been a lot of controversy recently about a scientist in China who has experimented with gene editing. Molecular biologist Dr. A.J. Roberts says gene editing is dangerous because they make people more susceptible to other diseases.
You can also disrupt the normal process of the cell, even just by targeting the one gene you were after. And so a lot of people are concerned that these babies might be more susceptible to cancer in their adult life because of the manipulations that have taken place.
Catch the entire interview with Dr. Roberts discussing the dangers of gene editing coming up in the second half of our show. The Chinese scientist who claims to have created the world's first gene-edited babies has been arrested. There are reports that He Jiankui has been placed under house arrest in China after making an appearance at the Second International Summit on Human Genome Editing in Hong Kong last Wednesday. The scientist sparked global controversy last week when he announced that he had successfully used a gene editing tool to modify the DNA of 2 embryos. There was no school today for students in a school division north of Winnipeg. The Lord Selkirk Division canceled classes at 15 schools following a couple of alleged threats against students. The Mounties have arrested 3 people, an 18-year-old man and woman and a 16-year-old boy. About a dozen people left Winnipeg yesterday on the first Via Rail passenger train to make its way to Churchill in 18 months. Officials say another 100 people are expected to board along the route to Churchill. In May of last year, parts of the tracks along the route were washed out due to flooding. Arctic Gateway Group purchased the Hudson Bay Railway earlier this year and fixed all of the broken tracks this fall. The train is set to arrive in Churchill tomorrow morning. Canada's first woman in space, Roberta Bondar, says it is very exciting to see David St. Jacques going on a space mission for 6 months. The Canadian astronaut took off from the International Space Station earlier today.
I helped select David St. Jacques. I helped train him. He was there for my launch, and so I'm very much looking forward to seeing him successfully leave Earth and start his grand adventure off the planet. I recognize that life goes in stages, and people get their relative turn. And when it's your hand on the oars, you should be pulling as hard as you can. But then you get to a certain stage and you realize, hand those oars over to somebody else and try and be productive at this next phase of life.
David St. Jacques and I are working on a project on migratory birds. So while he's in space, I'll be down taking photographs on the ground and in helicopters, various places on the planet that he's going to photograph from space. So while he launches to space, I'll be down in the warmer parts of the planet right now photographing these migratory birds. We have so few Canadians that do participate in space. It's been at least 5 years since Colonel Hadfield flew, and I think each astronaut is going to be able to carve his and her own place. And you know, maybe in the next decade we'll see a woman on the surface of the moon as a Canadian. It's all very exciting.
A charter bus carrying a youth football team from Tennessee crashed earlier today in central Arkansas. The accident killed one child and injured at least 45 others about 40 kilometers outside of Little Rock. Police said most of the injured were children who were taken to local hospitals. There was no information as to the severity of the injuries. At least 12 tornadoes were reported in Illinois over the weekend. Meteorologists say if more are confirmed, it would be the most tornadoes in Illinois in a December storm in decades.
This is one of my storage buildings here. I have 3 buildings on site, and all 3 have some damage, but as you can see behind me, this one is completely wiped out.
I seen the tornado hit. It hit that house over there. It tore up corn rib, turned the pickup truck all the way around in a circle, and I was right behind it. I felt the wind force in my car. It sounded like a train.
It actually I was telling my wife a while ago, it actually put chills up my spine when I seen it. I mean, you could actually see debris still going up through the air.
New York City police detectives recovered an engagement ring that an English couple lost down a Times Square utility grate.
So we got a phone call from the precinct that was on scene around midnight that a couple had dropped the ring down the sewer grate. We took a ride over and we opened up the sewer grate to attempt to recover the ring. Due to the lighting conditions, unfortunately, we weren't able to find it after spending about an hour in the sewer. At the end of the midnight tour, at the start of the day tour, I let the officers that were taking over know, and they said they would come back over and take a look for it in better conditions.
Detective Glackett and I came back up here during the daylight hours at about 9 a.m. or so. Figured maybe with daylight we'd have some better luck finding the ring down there. So we contacted Detective Fulgeri at home. He was kind enough on his own time to let us know exactly where the grate was. We opened it back up, went back down there, and fortunately, after about 10 or 15 minutes, we were able to recover it from the sewer grate. There was a lot of muck and a lot of just typical stuff that you would find at the bottom of a sewer grate down there. But fortunately, it was actually kind of sitting up on top of all that stuff, so it really wasn't that hard to find. It was still just a small object like that amidst all the garbage.
Unfortunately, it's New York City. We have a lot of grates.
I'm surprised we didn't find more than this one down there. So this is the ring. Yep. I'm a little more nimble, so you know. What's that? It's probably about 8 feet, but there's a ladder that leads down there. I don't know if we're going to be doing it personally, but I'm sure it'll safely make its way back to them.
The NYPD is pretty confident that they'll be able to reunite the ring with its rightful owner very soon. The most violent urban riots in 10 years engulfed the French capital on Saturday as Yellow Jacket protesters torched cars, smashed windows, and looted stores with multicolored graffiti. Many in France are angry over French President Macron's fuel tax, which they say is completely unwarranted. It was the 3rd straight weekend of clashes in Paris and the worst urban violence since 2005. Paris police say at least 92 people, including 20 police officers, were injured and 224 people have been arrested. Thousands of police were deployed to try and contain the mayhem. Many churches in Taiwan united in prayer and took part in a recent referendum voting on the traditional definition of marriage between a man and a woman. We have more now in this report.
The Coalition for the Happiness of Our Next Generation submitted 3 referendum proposals in early 2018. On November 24th, the people of Taiwan voted on the proposals as part of local elections. For Taiwanese churches, the referendum is not only civic participation, but also the switch that activated interdenominational unity. Uniting in prayer during the proposal stage, cooperating to collect signatures, and rallying together before elections, churches in different regions of Taiwan have united to defend marriage between a man and a woman. Northern Taiwan is an important urban center. Churches saw the urgent but difficult task of promoting the referendum and sprang into action, building consensus at joint prayer meetings, uniting together, and laying the foundation for a dialogue with society.
和好合一是一个平台，而在这个平台的里面，神要做，不管是宣教、传福音，让我们完成大使命啊。 或者是面对征战、属灵的征战，或者类似像这样的一个公投这样的征战，透过这个平台，让我们合一的深度更深，广度更广，而且让我们的强度更强。
Churches in central Taiwan are well connected. Large churches actively send hundreds of teams to partner with rural churches to promote the referendum at election rallies, expanding their influence. Churches in southern Taiwan display their enthusiasm for promoting the referendum, from cement trucks in Tainan, plastering temples, and spreading the word in farmers' markets. You could see their hard work everywhere. As a result of the referendum, God blessed Taiwanese churches with a spirit of unity. May churches in Taiwan continue to walk in God's path.
Now here's something you don't see every day. Hundreds of skiing and snowboarding Santas hit the slopes yesterday in Maine for a good cause. About 300 red-suited lookalikes gathered for the 19th annual Santa Sunday. The Santas all donate a minimum of $20, which helps to support local education and recreation programs. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas, isn't it? But the snow has stopped, but the cooler temperatures have remained. Fortunately, more sunshine's in the forecast over the next few days. I'll have weather details coming up in just a moment. Mostly cloudy and cool in Lethbridge today. The clouds should clear tonight with a low near -8. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 3. The cooler temperatures return on Wednesday as the mercury drops to -8. Blue sky and -8 as well on Thursday. Friday, lots of sunshine again with the temperature increasing to -4. Saturday, the warm air returns with lots of sunshine and a high near 8 degrees. Looking at our almanac, the average high for this time of year is +1 with an average low of -10. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1988 at 14 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -30 in 1972. Sunrise was at 8:09, sunset at 4:33. Let's have a look at the national forecast for tomorrow now. Vancouver will be mainly sunny with a high near 4. Sunshine as well in Victoria with a high of 5. Calgary will be mainly sunny tomorrow and -3. A good chance of flurries in Edmonton tomorrow and a high of -1. Regina will have flurries and -10. Saskatoon will have a mixture of sun and cloud and get up to -8. Winnipeg will be sunny and -8 as well. Partly cloudy in Toronto tomorrow with a high near 0. Lots of sunshine on tap for our nation's capital, but a cool -5. Montreal will be mainly sunny and -4. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be overcast and -4. A good chance of snow and 0 for Halifax, Nova Scotia tomorrow. Charlottetown, PEI will have flurries of -2. And at St. John's, Newfoundland, there was a wind warning today. Tomorrow, showers and a high of 5 degrees. Stats Canada is suspending the practice of obtaining personal credit records from the credit bureau TransUnion. It has also written to banks saying it will delay the plan of obtaining banking details of 500,000 Canadian households. The move comes as the agency is under investigation by the Federal Privacy Commissioner after concerns were raised over its plans to obtain a level of access to the personal information of Canadians. While the plan to gather banking records was a pilot project the agency hoped to launch in January, StatsCan has already been collecting personal financial data from TransUnion for more than a year. Shares in oil sands companies most likely to benefit from Alberta's move to curtail oil production are soaring today. Cenovus Energy's share prices were up as much as 13% in early morning trading, while Canadian Natural Resources rose 16% from its close on Friday. Premier Rachel Notley announced a mandatory 8.7% production cut is being imposed next month to reduce the glut of oil that has helped increase the price discount for Alberta's oil compared with the North American benchmark. The discount had improved by $7 US per barrel today over Friday. OPEC is losing a member nation from the Middle East for the first time in its 58-year history. The small energy-rich Arab nation of Qatar has made the announcement that it will withdraw from the Vienna-based cartel next month. Qatar, which is the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, plans to increase its exports from 77 million tons of gas per year to 110 million tons and raise its oil production. The New York Stock Exchange held a moment of silence today to pay tribute to U.S. President George H.W. Bush. A single strike of the noisy bell indicated the start of the solemn observance. Traders then bowed their heads in respect. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Colehurst Fire Department responded to a house fire around 5 a.m. this morning. When they arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames, including 2 cars that were destroyed in the garage. Fortunately, there were no injuries. An investigation into the blaze continues. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the recent gene editing work from a Chinese scientist altering the DNA of embryos. Up next, I chat with a molecular biologist about the dangers of gene editing and how dangerous it can be. That interview is next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Christian Women's and Men's Choirs are pleased to present their annual Christmas concert on this holy night on Friday, December 7th, beginning at 7:30 p.m. at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. Come and enjoy a festive evening with the whole family. Admission is free with a free will offering being taken. Bring your whole family to Breakfast with Santa, taking place December 8th from 9 a.m. to noon at the Colehurst High School. Enjoy delicious pancakes, kids' crafts, get photos taken with Santa and Mrs. Claus. Plus, the Colehurst High School will be presenting a Villainous Christmas drama production. So much more to see and do. Cost is $5 per person or $20 per family. All funds will go to support events and activities at the Colehurst High School. Volunteer Lethbridge will be offering gift wrapping services to the community at Park Place Shopping Centre until December 24th during shopping hours. If you have one or several gifts to wrap, contact Volunteer Lethbridge to make arrangements for your multi-package wrapping needs. Prices per gift range from $3 to $20 depending on the size of package. To volunteer for this fun opportunity or for more information, contact Chelsea at 403-332-4320 or email communications@volunteerlethbridge.com. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
News of the world's first genetically edited babies born in China has stirred concern over the ethical implications. Joining me now from Covina, California is molecular biologist Dr. Anjanette Roberts, otherwise known as AJ, a research scholar with reasons to believe. AJ, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much, Hal. I'm really happy to be here.
Can you share a little bit of backstory leading up to the situation, gene-edited babies? How did we reach this point?
Right. So really it dates back to 2012, where they discovered the use of a bacterial immune system that's become known as CRISPR-Cas9, which is sort of a technical abbreviation for the protein that they can use along with RNA sequences that they can generate and make very specific, that when you introduce those into any cell, that machinery can actually target the genetic information already present in the cell and change it. And so it's a gene editing tool that's actually pretty efficient and pretty easy to use in the laboratory.
Now, I understand at this point, we don't actually know for sure whether the babies were born or if they were aborted.
They were born, at least according to the claims of the researcher who made the announcement. They were born a few weeks ago as healthy baby girls, Lulu and Nana, to Mother Grace. And he has testified that during the pregnancy and shortly after the in vitro fertilization that started the process, that they've gone in and tested the cells associated with both babies and that they were successful. Now, none of this has been published in any kind of scientific or medical journal yet, which is where it really undergoes heavy peer scrutiny. And so even though the announcement of the birth was made prior to an international summit in Hong Kong just a few days ago, at the international summit, he also presented his findings, but the researcher who helped co-discover the CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing system, Jennifer Doudna, made a comment that he went through the technical aspects of what they had done very quickly and not in great detail. And so even scientists who attended that summit, who heard him present the data firsthand, are still skeptical as to what happened and what exactly the outcome has been. But according to his own claims, successful birth of twin baby girls a few weeks ago.
Now, the Chinese doctor says that he altered the DNA with a goal to increase resistance for possible future infection like HIV, smallpox, and so forth. I mean, noble intentions, but one of the ethical issues has to be the babies could not give their consent for this.
You know, that's certainly one of the larger ethical questions that the general public would be able to wrestle with immediately. When you're actually editing something at an embryonic stage, which they claimed they did right after fertilization of the egg and the sperm, they're actually altering every cell in both of those children, which means when they grow to adulthood, if they reach reproductive abilities and actually have children of their own, all of their children will have the exact same edits that these individuals made to these embryos in the lab. And so just to be a little bit picky about the technical integrity of our conversation, he only has claimed to make modifications that would prevent HIV infection. And he did that by altering a particular protein that's present in cells that allows HIV to actually infect cells. And so by removing that protein, you sort of remove a doorway that HIV uses to get into cells.
Now, is there a chance that maybe some of this DNA editing could cause future health problems down the road for kids?
Absolutely. And so the technology, first in and of itself, still hasn't got all the kinks worked out. And so even though you might be specifically targeting one protein or one gene, we have a problem that's known as off-target hits. And so especially when you're working with, this is a little technical, I apologize for that, but especially when you're working with a cell that's in its embryonic stage, the cell has undergone some sort of reprogramming at a DNA level that makes the DNA more susceptible than DNA in an adult cell. And so if you're trying to target a specific gene in an embryonic cell, scientists have found that the off-target hits are actually increased in targeting embryonic cells as opposed to targeting adult cells. So, but even in adult cells, we get off-target effects. So that's one problem. The other problem is that you can also disrupt the normal process of the cell, even just by targeting the one gene you were after. And so a lot of people are concerned that these babies might be more susceptible to cancer in their adult life because of the manipulations that have taken place.
Now, China's government ordered a halt to the work of that researcher who claims he helped make the world's first gene-edited babies. Some scientists claim it's too early to try and make permanent changes to human DNA that can be inherited.
That's absolutely right. And that's where the biggest ethical debate is right now in the scientific community. This is where all of the safeguards are in place. The scientific community that met at the Human Genome Editing Summit in 2015, and then again just this past week, they've reiterated that these types of experiments are absolutely unethical and shouldn't be approached by anyone in the scientific community, regardless of what country they do their work in.
Now, do we know if these scientists have plans to maybe do some follow-up testing to see if they were successful?
Sure. I think they've already claimed that they've done those tests. They've already collected one, and they say that the gene they targeted was in fact removed and that they don't see any indication of any other changes in the genome. But those tests, the whole genome sequencing, they have a lower limit of detection. And so they may in fact have changes that they're unable to detect based on even our most technologically advanced analyses today.
So AJ, is it true that changes to an embryo could be inherited by future generations and eventually could affect the entire gene pool?
Yes. So these types of changes the researchers have made in China, or claim to have made in China, these types of changes absolutely will be passed to future generations. All of the descendants of these two young baby girls, if they grow up and have children of their own, every one of their children will have these changes, at least in one copy, because they inherit one set of their chromosomes from future mother, right?
Now, the nation of China, with its communist leadership, doesn't exactly have the greatest track record when it comes to ethical issues. Would you agree that DNA editing will very likely become a reality of the future, not just in Asia, but maybe make its way to North America?
Well, I think that that's the hope of many researchers who are actually working on it today, that once we get all of the kinks worked out, that things that pose real threats to human health, right? And we could argue that making someone more resistant to HIV, we don't really need to do that because there are other ways to prevent HIV infection. So the risk reward, if you will, is sort of breaks down in the gene that he chose to edit. But if we could eradicate muscular dystrophy, or if we could eradicate cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia, or some other blood disorders or some genetic forms of blindness, then once we've got all the kinks worked out, these are the types of interventions that might lie in our human future. But I would caution that that needs to be quite a ways down the road after many ethical conversations and after we've got the science fine-tuned to not make unintended mistakes.
How about editing genes to help people live longer? Instead of maybe 90 or 100 years, maybe up to 150, 200 years.
Well, I think those are very complex gene sets, and I don't think there's going to be a magic bullet where we target one gene and can accomplish an extended lifetime. But once we've identified all of those genes that are contributing to a complex system like aging, it's possible.
So the concern is that some nations will try to essentially breed or maybe create designer babies, some to be great soldiers, brilliant scientists, maybe athletes, or perhaps some to be docile, do-as-you're-told workers. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really more material for science fiction at this point in time. All of those things that you mentioned are very complex behavioral outcomes, and the number of different genes that would contribute to something like that complex behavioral outcome, we're not even close to being able to identify what all of those would be. So diseases where it's a single gene has a single disease phenotype, those are very real potential targets in the not too distant future. And there are clinical trials that even treat single gene associated diseases in the works even now, right? So that's good. They're editing adult cells in an adult person, and so they're not changing at an embryonic level all of the cells in a particular individual. But those other things that you brought up are really complex traits or phenomena, and to be able to address those, we can't even begin to articulate how many genes that might be, let alone try and target them all.
Is there a magical way we can actually stop governments and scientists from abusing this DNA editing, maybe making it a little more ethical?
That's a great question. Controlling individual activities or controlling the actions of nations is, as we know, almost an impossible task. So what we can do is we can agree at international summits, which we have as scientists, that these types of behavior are unethical. And so what that can basically amount to in some countries, it can actually carry criminal prosecution. In other countries, it basically would render the individual who breaks those rules as blackballed. And so it might be the end of their professional livelihood. They wouldn't be able to be employed or something to that effect. But, once you've made an edit and the child's been born, so to speak, the cat's already out of the bag, and you've at least altered some of the human genes in the future human gene pool by even just changing it in two individuals. So,
is there a way to reverse an edit when it comes to DNA editing?
Wow, that's a fabulous question. The answer would be yes, but to reverse that type of change would require that you either target all of their gametes, all of their cells that will go on and produce offspring, or you have a very incomplete treatment in the sense that you can target some cells and accomplish the reverse edit in some cells, but targeting all of the cells in a single individual's body would be a Herculean effort and probably not attainable.
So what are your thoughts on where this is actually headed, AJ? Where will we be in about 10 years from now when it comes to DNA editing?
10 years from now, when it comes to DNA editing, I think we'll have enough clinical data and probably even be implementing in some clinics or doctors' offices the ability to correct things like single gene diseases, blood disorders, things like muscular dystrophy or sickle cell, at least to a certain level. Again, targeting every cell might be really difficult, but maybe we can target enough cells with enough efficiency that the individual who's had that treatment notices a real benefit to themselves. But it would be at an adult level, something that's called a somatic cell level, where you're not altering all future generations and you're not altering the genes, every cell in the individual.
What do you say to those people who have a lot of fears and concerns when it comes to gene editing, saying that scientists should not be playing God, should not be playing with people's lives?
Excellent question, and it's an excellent critique. And I think that in our current state, those criticisms need to be the one winning the dialogue, because there are still risks associated. There are still things that need to be worked out. The question becomes, when do we know enough about what we're trying to change? When are we able to accomplish only the changes that we want and no unforeseen changes? And when we reach that level of confidence, then the question becomes, well, it actually remains a very complex question that could get into human suffering. And what is the value of being part of a society that encounters suffering and has to deal with that? I actually think that, and I'm not wishing suffering on any individual, but I think it's part of our human experience. And I think we learn and demonstrate a depth of compassion and courage in light of human suffering. And if we remove that from our human experience, I think we're fundamentally altering what it means to be human and what God may intend for us.
Dr. A.J. Roberts, molecular biologist with Reasons to Believe, thanks a lot for joining me today from Covina, California.
Thank you, Hal.
A newly published study of older adults residing in assisted living and independent living communities shows significant improvement in brain processing speed among those who used a particular brain exercise. Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Monka, CEO of Posit Science, joins me now from San Francisco, California, to chat about the study. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Dr. Monka.
It's great to be here, Hal. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, first of all, can you give me some perspective? What percentage of older adults struggle with slow cognitive abilities, even dementia?
Well, that's a great question. You know, if we look at dementia, what we know is that once people are over 85, that can actually affect almost half of all people. But if we step back from dementia and say, hey, what number of people are affected by just slowing down a bit, by having their memory be a bit worse? And the answer really starts to be not quite everyone. There's always a few people who are extremely sharp at any age, but almost everyone looks back and says, hey, I was a little faster when I was in my 50s or in my 30s, and my memory was a little bit sharper. So this mild form of cognitive change, you know, it's not dementia. I don't want people to think they have Alzheimer's disease the moment they forget their keys, but it does represent a change in normal cognitive performance. And it's something that increasingly we can do something about.
Now, can you tell me how the study was done? What kinds of brain exercises were these seniors actually doing?
Sure. This study was run in Iowa by an independent academic researcher named Dr. Fred Walensky. And he's been studying a set of cognitive exercises that were developed quite some time ago that are actually designed to speed up and make more accurate how the brain processes information. Literally, a person doing these brain exercises will sit in front of a computer or their iPad, and they're going to look at the screen, and they're going to see something come on the screen in the center of their vision. And it's something, a little picture like a car or a truck. It's a little bit hard to say which it is. And they have to look carefully at the center of the screen, and they also have to pay attention to their peripheral vision, and they have to notice where something is happening in their peripheral vision. And it sounds a little obscure, but what it's asking the brain to do is it's asking the brain to spread the brain's attention while operating very quickly. And by doing that, it turns out we can actually make the brain faster and more accurate.
So it would reverse the normal slowing down of the brain, these exercises?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's been shown really in dozens of trials at this point, and including an extremely large trial called the ACTIVE study that studied almost 3,000 people and followed them for more than 10 years. What's exciting about the new results is that most studies so far have looked at older adults who are independently living in their own homes and shown that we can protect against cognitive decline. This is really one of the first studies to take a step forward and say, well, hey, let's see if this can work with people who are in assisted living or in independent living already. They're a little bit older on the average. They typically have a few more health conditions already. They're typically a bit more worried about cognitive decline than people who are still operating independently. Can the same tool be used to help those people sharpen their brain function and improve their cognitive function? And what the study shows is yes.
So at what age does our brain processing speed first start to slow down? When do we first notice that?
Hal, I have terrible news for you and me both, because the answer is about the age of 27. And I don't want to be picky.
Well, I'm a little over that now.
Here,
yeah,
but I think we're both comfortable saying we're just a tiny bit over 27. So yeah, cognitive performance really peaks in our 20s, at the age of 27, and then certainly in our 30s, we can start to notice just the tiniest changes in speed and attention. And of course, those changes on the average get bigger as we get older.
So when does it actually dramatically slow down? Maybe by the time you hit 65, when you retire?
Around 65 is when we can start to see that performance really start to fall off. One way that we think about cognitive decline is that it's preserved, it's maintained by active, really engagement in the world. If you think about life at work, your life at work, for example, you have to be sharp. You're on the air. You have to be fast. You have to think of questions. You have to hear people like me talking a little bit more quickly than you might prefer. Your brain has to do all that work to keep up. And there's a lot of thought that when we retire, some people have a ton of hobbies and they keep all that cognitive stimulation going. When my mom retired, for example, she started a neighborhood association in Washington, D.C. She basically became a small businesswoman and hired people and so forth. She kept very busy. But other people, they retire and they think, well, it's a good time to sit on the sofa and catch up on a lot of old TV. And because the brain's not getting that stimulation anymore, that probably accelerates some of the cognitive decline that we see.
So what are some of the games maybe we can incorporate into our daily lives? The old Rubik's Cube, like way back from the 80s, Sudoku. I mean, what could we actually do? Find the word, connect the dots, right?
That's a great question. And, of course, I work in Posit Science. We make a cognitive training company, a program called Brain HQ. Let me tell you a little bit about that first, and then I'll talk about some other things a person might think about it as well. Now, the study that we're talking about today used a cognitive exercise that's now part of Brain HQ. That exercise is called double decision. And, of course, that represents a way a person can use their computer, use their iPad to do something that's very scientifically based and been proven to help people stay sharp. That same researcher at the University of Iowa, Dr. Fred Walensky, had previously run another very large study called the IHAM study, where he compared this kind of brain training to crossword puzzles. And what he showed there actually was that this kind of specific scientifically based brain training was better than crossword puzzles at improving speed and attention. Now, that being said, when we think, hey, why do these specific kind of brain training exercises work and maybe crossword puzzles don't? Well, the answer is what the brain craves is new learning, and what it needs is to become fast and accurate. So when I think about crossword puzzles, it's not really about learning something new. Most people who enjoy crossword puzzles have been doing them for 30 or 40 years. The brain's almost working on autopilot. What the brain needs is to learn new things, learn a new language, learn a new route to the store, learn a new musical instrument. Again, I'll go back to my mom. She picked up the harpsichord of all the interesting things, so she had inherited one. And that was tremendous new learning and kept her brain fast and accurate. So those are the kinds of ordinary day-to-day activities we look at and say, hey, can we get people to engage in more of those kinds of activities? In the same way that a person can keep a healthy body by starting regular exercise, walking, for example, jogging, going to the gym, we'd like to see people keep a healthy mind by engaging in these kinds of speed and accurate brain exercises.
Maybe I should get my mother to learn how to play electric guitar. Then we can form a band, maybe hit the road and make some extra cash, help with her retirement, right?
I think that's a great idea. I'd love to see more of that. I'll buy a ticket when you guys tour San Francisco.
So Dr. Monka, what about walking or balancing abilities? How will a lot of those tests actually help in that regard?
Sure. So as well as those kinds of cognitive issues, people notice what we think of as motor issues around, as you say, walking or balance or things like that. And often we thought those are about muscles, right? That older people, maybe they lose some of their leg muscles, so they're more likely to fall. And that is to some extent true. But the brain actually plays a huge role in mobility and walking. And the reason is because as you walk or if you trip and start to fall, the visual world moves past you, right? And your brain has to notice all of this visual activity. And that information is almost the first trigger, as well as the balance of your inner ear, to tell the brain that you're falling and take a response. As the brain slows down, it doesn't notice that as quickly. And so when you begin to fall, you're not as likely to notice quickly that you're falling. Now, it turns out that actually these same visual exercises have been shown in other studies done at the University of Illinois to actually improve balance in older people as well, probably by improving that brain speed of visual processing. And what it really tells us is the body and the brain are deeply related, right? Sometimes we think of the brain as this kind of mystical, black box that happens to be inside of our head. But of course, it's an organ of our body, just the way our liver is, just the way our stomach is. And of course, it gives rise to much richer and experiences than our liver or our stomach. But nonetheless, it is a piece of tissue that has to be kept healthy, and it relates to the body in this complex way. And while it's almost certainly true that by improving our body's health, we can improve our brain health, but also it seems like by improving our brain health, we can probably improve our physical health, our body's health.
So would exercising actually improve people's moods? They've had greater confidence and maybe less depression?
There's a tremendous number of studies right now that make that argument, that by going out, even by regular walking, by exercising independently in the gym with friends, that as well as the body physical benefits we might expect, lower cholesterol rates and lower bodily fat and greater health, that people's brain health is improved at the same time, that they stay sharper and they stay more cognitively fit. And in fact, the National Academy of Medicine last year suggested that there are now 3 kinds of interventions that promote brain health. And the first was physical exercise. In the same way we think about body health, they said, hey, this almost certainly improves brain health. The second thing they suggested was maintaining correct blood pressure. It's now been shown, I think, increasingly clearly that high blood pressure creates slight brain damage over time, and that can lead to cognitive decline and dementia. So if you're supposed to take your blood pressure pills, you should do that. And then the third thing that the National Academy recommended was this specific kind of scientifically based cognitive training, that these kinds of things, that these kinds of speed and accuracy exercises could improve brain health. So I think we're moving towards a time, we're not quite there yet, but step by step we're getting there, where doctors will be able to recommend specific brain health programs for people exactly in the same way that they recommend physical health programs for people right now.
So explain, Dr. Monka, what happens with the brain as a result of the speed training, maybe some of the physiological changes.
Sure. So what happens as we get older is that the brain actually gets a bit noisier, one might say. Imagine you're listening to the radio, and now you and I might remember this when radios used to have dials, right?
Yeah.
And imagine you're listening to the radio and the dial gets off a little bit and it starts to get kind of staticky. Well, the brain has to work harder to hear what's going on in the presence of that noise. And in fact, we know that that's true. If I were to give you a memory test in a clear listening environment like right now, I might be able to read you 16 words, and you're a sharp guy, maybe you can remember 12 or 13, that's pretty good. But if I read those same 16 words to you in a really noisy environment, right, we're at a rock concert with your mom, and you're not going to be able to remember 12 anymore. You might only remember 5 or 6 because the brain has to overcome that noise. As we get older, that noise is actually coming from inside the brain itself as a result of the physical aging of the brain's tissue. Now, what these speed and accuracy exercises do, it's like they bring that radio back onto the signal and eliminate that noise. So information moves through the brain strongly and more accurately. And so when it hits the memory centers of the brain, when it requires attention from the brain, that information is there in a sort of a loud, clear format, one might say, and a person can remember it better and act on it better.
So will brain exercises actually improve someone's driving ability?
Yeah, there's wonderful evidence now on this front. So there have been great clinical trials from universities showing that this kind of visual speed and accuracy improvement makes people safer drivers. There was a wonderful study done in Kentucky, for example, where they actually had people drive a course with city driving and country driving and counted the number of dangerous driving maneuvers they've made. A person actually sat in the back seat of the car, and every time someone made a turn that had an oncoming car, they checked a box. Must have been a terrifying study to be a scientist on. And what they showed is that after this kind of brain training, people made fewer dangerous driving maneuvers. They also showed in a large study that they had about 50% fewer at-fault crashes because they were sharper and more aware of everything around them. They could notice that a car was coming in maybe at an intersection and step on the brake. And then most recently, we've been working with an auto insurance company here in the US, the American Automobile Association. They offer this program at no cost for their older drivers. And with them, we've been able to show that people who do the program actually reduce their actual crash-related claims. They have fewer crashes, they cost the insurer less, and of course, everyone's happy to stay out of a crash, right? Saves you time and money and maybe your health. And seeing that real-world crash reduction go down is incredibly dramatic. So the brain's really involved in so much of what we do. Often people think, well, it's just about memory, and memory is important. But of course, the brain is, it's the center in many ways of who we are. It involves our movement and our driving and our pleasure in life and our sense of self. And keeping that strong in the same way we want to keep our body strong, that just seems to be increasingly important as the science comes in.
So would these kinds of brain exercises really be helpful for somebody under the age of 27? For some of the younger people, would it help decrease the risk of developing dementia later in life?
Yeah, there's 2 questions there, and they're both extremely interesting. The first is, hey, we can improve cognitive function in older people. How about taking a young, sharp person and making them even sharper? And, it really looks like the answer to that is yes. Now, there haven't yet been large-scale studies on this, but we know from individuals who use our training programs who are younger that they tell us that they feel sharper and they're sharper afterwards. Of course, one of the best examples is the quarterback, Tom Brady, from the New England Patriots. He actually came to us several years ago biggest shock of my life, right? I'm a lab rat. If you ever asked me, hey, do you think you'll ever meet the quarterback for the New England Patriots? I would have said, no, that's probably not on my life plan.
Dr. Monka, go deep, go deep.
Yes, that's right. It's a truly desperate situation for the Pats. But he and his trainer called us up and said Thomas started using the program because, you know, he's a guy who's at the 99th percentile and needs to be at the 99.9th if he's going to keep winning Super Bowls. And he told us that using these visual training exercises, they helped him see down the field faster and more accurately. He's only got a few seconds when he gets the ball between that, picking his play, hitting his receiver before he's going to get tackled. And we hear more and more things like that. The other question you asked is, hey, if you had a lifelong program of cognitive exercise, would you show a lower risk of dementia? And that's a really interesting question. Of course, it's an extremely hard study to do, right? To start someone in their 20s and then ask 50 years later, do they have less dementia? But there are some kind of hints of this, right? There's a wonderful study done up in Minnesota with a group of nuns. And what they saw was these nuns were wonderful people, and they had volunteered to donate their bodies and their brains for science after they passed away. And an incredibly unique and giving population because, of course, what had happened in their lives at the nunnery was very well documented, right? If someone were to study you or me, it might be hard to figure out what we ate 20 years ago, right? But the nuns, it was pretty clear what they were eating 20 years ago, for example. And so they actually were able to look at the diaries of these nuns when they were young women writing essays around why they had joined the nunnery and show that the young women who had written the more complex essays with greater cognitive function at the age of 17 or 19 or 21 were actually less likely to get dementia 50 years later when they passed away and donated their minds and bodies to science. And so what that tells us is that something about our youth is setting ourselves up for our age 50 years later. In the same way that we think of physical health as a lifelong activity, no one would say, don't bother exercising until you're 65. That's when you start to need to exercise. No one would say that, right? We know you got to exercise in your 20s, your 30s, and beyond. And I think that what we'll see in the future very much is we'll see that we need to have our brains sharp at all ages to set ourselves up for success in life later. And this was further just shown about 2 years ago when a first study showed that people who did this precise kind of brain exercise was shared at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference 2 years ago and provided the first evidence that this kind of brain exercise could reduce the risk of going on to dementia. Now, there's a lot more studies going on in that area. I always want to be very careful about how I describe that, but I think for a lot of us in the field, it raised hope for the first time that this kind of brain exercise could do exactly what you're thinking about.
So, Dr. Monka, we only have a few moments left here. We need to let our viewers know how to access this kind of training. Is speed training available to the general public?
Yeah, it's part of the Brain HQ program, and people can go to www.brainhq.com. They can register for free for Brain HQ. It will actually give them an exercise every day to try out. And of course, if they like it and they want the whole program, they can subscribe. And it's really meant to be pretty inexpensive. So I think in Canada, it's about 120 Canadian dollars a year, about $10 a month.
Neuroscientist Dr. Henry Monka, CEO of Posit Science, joining me from San Francisco, California. Thanks a lot for your time today, Doctor.
Thanks, Hal. And again, I look forward to seeing the band when you come through.
Oh, absolutely. We'll go on tour. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.